started like any other night. The faint hum of the fan above my bed, the streetlights painting faint shadows on the walls, and the soft, distant sound of sirens. A constant soundtrack of life in the city. I was half asleep, drifting in that strange space between dreams and reality, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. First, I ignored it. No good call ever comes at 2 a.m. But then it buzzed again, and again. Groaning, I reached over and squinted at the screen. The name on it made my blood run cold. Rachel Harper. I hadn't seen or heard from her in 10 years. A decade of silence, of trying to piece my life back together after she destroyed it. Her betrayal had left scars I'd worked hard to ignore, but seeing her name on that glowing screen ripped them open like it had happened yesterday. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, or maybe some twisted form of masochism, got the better of me. I slid my thumb across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello." My voice came out hoarse, rougher than I intended. "John," she said. Her voice hadn't changed. Soft, warm, familiar. It was the kind of voice that once felt like home. Now it was a ghost from a past I'd buried. "Rachel," I said, flat and cold. "Why are you calling me?" "I need to see you," she said, her voice trembling. "It's important. Please." I laughed bitterly, sitting up in bed. "Important? The last time you thought something was important, it ended with you in my best friend's bed. Forgive me if I'm not eager to hear what you have to say." "John," she interrupted, and there was something in her tone, something raw and desperate, that made me pause. "I can't explain over the phone, but it's about us, about what happened back then. And there's something else, something you need to know." Her words felt like hooks, dragging me deeper into waters I'd sworn never to swim in again. I clenched my jaw, staring at the dark ceiling. "Why now? Why after all these years?" "Because I didn't have a choice before," she said, her voice cracking. "But I do now. Please just meet me. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Grayson's Cafe. You'll understand everything, I promise." I wanted to hang up, to tell her to never call me again. But something in the way she said it, like this was life or death, made me hesitate. Against every ounce of reason, I found myself saying, "Fine." The line went dead before I could change my mind. For a moment, I just sat there in the silence, staring at my phone. The life I'd carefully rebuilt over the past decade suddenly felt fragile, like it could crumble at any second. I knew I should let it go, but I also knew I wouldn't, because part of me still needed answers. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it a flood of memories I'd worked hard to bury. As I stared into my cup of coffee, the bitter aroma mixing with the sound of distant traffic, I found myself spiraling back to the life I'd shared with Rachel. We met in college, during a warm autumn afternoon when the campus was alive with the colors of fall. Rachel had this way of lighting up a room with her laughter, of making the mundane feel extraordinary. She wasn't just my wife. She was my world. But the world has a cruel way of falling apart. I trusted her with every piece of myself, until the day I came home early from work and found her sitting on the edge of our bed, her face pale and eyes rimmed with tears. She tried to speak, but I already knew. The guilt was written all over her. Then came the name I never expected to hear. Michael. Michael was my best friend, someone I'd known since childhood. He was the kind of person you'd trust with your life, and I had. But the look on Rachel's face that day told me all I needed to know. The betrayal was complete, and the foundation of everything I'd believed in crumbled in an instant. The divorce was quick, brutal, and clinical. She didn't fight for anything. No alimony, no arguments over furniture or money. She walked away as if she'd been waiting for an excuse to leave. I spent months questioning everything, my judgment, my worth, my ability to ever trust again. And then, I did the only thing I could. I buried it. I moved to another city, changed jobs, and rebuilt my life brick by brick. I told myself she was part of a chapter I'd closed for good. But as I sat there, waiting for the clock to strike 10, I realized those old wounds had never fully healed. Rachel's call had torn the bandages off, and the memories spilled out like blood. Grayson's Cafe was a small, unassuming spot tucked between a pharmacy and a laundromat. We used to come here on lazy Saturday mornings, back when things were simpler. I hesitated at the door, wondering if walking in meant reopening the pain I'd fought so hard to forget. But I pushed the door open anyway. The bell jingled overhead, and my eyes immediately landed on her. She sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup of tea. She looked older, tired, worn in a way that no amount of makeup could hide. But there was something else, something beneath the surface. Fear. When her eyes met mine, I saw tears welling up. She started to stand but faltered, as though unsure whether she had the right to approach me. I took a deep breath and walked over, every step feeling heavier than the last. "John," she said softly, her voice cracking. I didn't sit. I crossed my arms and stared down at her, my tone colder than I intended. "You've got my attention. Start talking." Her hands trembled as she set the cup down, leaving a faint ring of tea on the table. "I know you don't owe me anything, and I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I had to see you because there's something you don't know. Something I couldn't tell you before." I raised an eyebrow, skepticism dripping from my voice. "And what's that? That you regret it? That you were confused?" "Save it, Rachel. I don't need closure." "It's not about regret," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's about the truth. What happened back then, it wasn't what you think." Her words froze me in place. The truth? What the hell did she mean by that? I stared at her, trying to decipher her expression. Rachel looked fragile, almost haunted, like she carried the weight of a decade on her shoulders. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the man I used to be, the one who would have reached out to comfort her without hesitation. But that man was gone. "Not what I think?" I repeated, leaning against the chair opposite her. "Then enlighten me, Rachel. What was it?" She flinched at the sharpness in my tone but nodded, as if she'd been expecting it. Slowly, she gestured for me to sit. Against my better judgment, I did. Her fingers fidgeted with the handle of her cup, the ceramic clicking softly against the table. "When I told you about Michael back then, I didn't tell you everything. I couldn't." I scoffed. "Couldn't? Or wouldn't? There's a difference." She bit her lip, her eyes darting around the cafe as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It wasn't like that, John. It wasn't just an affair. I wasn't in love with him. I didn't even want to be near him." Her voice cracked, and she looked down at her hands, ashamed. "Then why the hell did it happen?" I demanded, my voice rising. A couple of patrons glanced our way, and I forced myself to lower my tone. "If you didn't love him, why did you destroy everything we had for him?" Her eyes locked onto mine, brimming with tears. "Because I didn't have a choice." The room seemed to go still. Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. I wanted to dismiss them, to laugh at the absurdity, but something in her voice stopped me. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice quieter now, though no less sharp. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "My father," she began, her voice trembling. "He got himself into trouble. Gambling debts. He owed money to people who don't forgive, John. Dangerous people. They threatened him, threatened me. And then, they threatened you." I stared at her, my mind racing to keep up. "Threatened me? What does this have to do with Michael?" "They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd come after you," she whispered. "They wanted leverage over you, John. Michael was part of their plan. He owed them too, and they used both of us to control you." Her words hit me like a blow to the chest. Control me? Why would they care about me? I was just some middle-class guy working a boring finance job. Her gaze dropped to the table again. "You weren't just some guy. You worked for Hartwell and Company at the time, the same firm that managed their accounts. They thought you might stumble onto something you weren't supposed to see." My stomach churned. Hartwell and Company had been a prestigious firm. Sure, but it wasn't the kind of place where I expected to find criminal activity. Or so I'd thought. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that your affair with Michael was some elaborate scheme to keep me distracted?" Her silence was answer enough. I shook my head, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. You could have told me. We could have gone to the police. They had people everywhere. She interrupted, her voice desperate. I couldn't risk it, John. Couldn't risk you. They told me if I said a word, you'd be dead by morning. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of her story clicking together in my mind like shards of broken glass. It was insane, unbelievable, and yet, something about the way she looked at me, the raw pain in her eyes, made me think it just might be true. Why now? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Why tell me this after all these years? Her lips trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. She slid it across the table, her hands shaking. Because of him, she said. I stared at the photo. It was a boy no older than 10, with messy brown hair and piercing green eyes. My heart stopped as I realized he looked almost exactly like me at that age. This is Liam, Rachel said softly. Our son. The cafe seemed to tilt on its axis, the world spinning out of control. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, my mind reeling. Our son, I echoed, my voice breaking. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to tell you, John, but it wasn't safe. They would have used him too. I had to protect him. And you. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. My entire reality had just been upended in a matter of minutes. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I left the cafe without saying another word. The photo of Liam burned a hole in my pocket. Every step I took feeling heavier than the last. The streets were alive with the hum of city life. Honking cars, snippets of conversation, the occasional bark of a stray dog, but it all sounded distant, like I was underwater. The son. My son. The thought twisted in my mind, too big to grasp. The air outside felt colder than it should have for a spring morning. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, replaying Rachel's words over and over. It didn't add up. How could she have kept this from me? How could I not have known? And if what she said about the threats was true, then who were these people who had controlled her life and mine without my knowledge? Eventually, I found myself back at my apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place on the second floor of a nondescript building. A far cry from the house Rachel and I once shared. I dropped onto the couch, staring at the photo again. Liam. The boy had my eyes, my stubborn jawline. There was no denying he was mine. But the longer I stared, the more questions bubbled to the surface. Did he know about me? Did he hate me for not being there? Was he even safe? My phone buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. For a split second, I thought it might be Rachel again, but the screen displayed an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello. There was a pause, followed by a low, gravelly voice. Stay away from her, Harper. The words sent a chill down my spine. Who is this? I demanded, sitting up straight. Consider this a friendly warning, the voice continued. Rachel made her choice a long time ago. Don't dig up the past, or you'll regret it. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever they were, they'd been watching. They knew Rachel and I had met. But how? And why were they still so desperate to keep me in the dark? Anger replaced fear as I stood and paced the room. This wasn't just about Rachel or Liam anymore. This was about me. About my right to know the truth about my own life. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, my mind racing with possibilities. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. The drive to Michael's house was tense. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the fallout with Rachel. But if anyone knew the truth, it was him. After all, he'd been part of this twisted game from the start. Michael lived in the suburbs, in a house that screamed upper-middle-class comfort. I parked on the curb and walked up the neatly trimmed path to his front door. My hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment before I pressed it. When the door opened, Michael's expression shifted from surprise to unease. He looked older, softer around the edges, but his eyes still carried that same calculating sharpness I remembered. John, he said, his voice guarded. Didn't expect to see you. Yeah, well, neither did I. I shot back. We need to talk. He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The inside of the house was as polished as the exterior, expensive furniture, framed family photos on the walls. But there was a tension in the air, like a coiled spring ready to snap. What's this about? Michael asked, crossing his arms. I pulled the photo of Liam from my pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. It's about this. Michael's face paled as he looked at the picture. His hands clenched at his sides, and for a moment he didn't speak. Rachel told you, he said finally, his voice low. She told me enough, I replied, stepping closer. Enough to know you were part of it. Enough to know you lied to me, betrayed me, and now I need to know the rest. Michael let out a heavy sigh, sinking into the nearest chair. He looked like a man carrying the weight of too many secrets. You have no idea what you've stepped into, John. You were never supposed to know. Know what? I demanded. He glanced toward the window, as if expecting someone to be watching. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, about the people who ruined all of our lives. Michael leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The silence between us stretched unbearably long. I stood there, waiting, my patience unraveling like a thread being pulled from a frayed sweater. Start talking, Michael, I said, my voice sharp. No more cryptic nonsense. No more lies. Who are these people? He looked up at me, his eyes tired and filled with something I hadn't expected. Fear. They call themselves the Larkspur Syndicate, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. A nice name for a group of criminals who deal in everything from money laundering to blackmail and murder. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The Larkspur Syndicate. The name sounded almost benign, like a gardening club, but the weight in Michael's voice told me it was anything but. What do they have to do with me? I asked. Michael ran a hand through his graying hair, exhaling deeply. They had their hooks in Rachel's dad first. He owed them a lot of money, gambling debts he could never pay off. They were going to make an example of him. But then they found out who Rachel was married to. You worked at Hartwell and Company, a firm that handled some of their dirty accounts. They thought you might stumble onto something, so they came up with a plan to neutralize you. Neutralize me? I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. They needed leverage, Michael said, avoiding my gaze. Something that would keep you distracted and under control. That's where Rachel and I came in. I felt my fists clench at my sides. You slept with my wife to distract me? He shook his head, his expression pained. It wasn't like that. They forced us both into it. They threatened Rachel's life, her father's life, and yes, yours too. I didn't want to do it, John. But they made it clear. Either I went along with their plan, or we'd all be dead. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I struggled to process what he was saying. For years, I'd carried the weight of their betrayal, the anger and heartbreak. And now, here he was, telling me it was all orchestrated by a shadowy group I'd never even heard of. Why not go to the police? I asked, my voice laced with frustration. Michael let out a bitter laugh. You think we didn't try? The syndicate has people everywhere. Law enforcement, government, even your precious Hartwell and Company. One wrong move and they'd know. They'd kill us before we got a chance to speak. I stared at him, trying to find the lie, the angle. But if he was lying, he was damn good at it. So what now? I asked. Michael hesitated, glancing toward the photo of Liam still lying on the coffee table. Rachel never wanted you to find out about Liam, he said quietly. She thought it was safer that way. But now that you know, they'll know too. They'll see it as a loose end. My blood turned to ice. You're saying they'll come after him? He nodded grimly. They don't leave loose ends, John. If they think Liam could expose them, even unintentionally, they'll do whatever it takes to eliminate the risk. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The thought of that boy, my son, being in danger because of a mess I didn't even know I was part of. It was too much. I need to see him, I said finally, my voice firm. I need to make sure he's safe. Michael looked at me, his expression unreadable. You're walking into a storm you're not ready for, John. These people, They're not just dangerous. They're untouchable. If you try to go up against them, I don't care, I snapped. I'm not going to sit back while my son is in danger. If they want to fight, they'll get one. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. If you're serious about this, you'll need help. And you'll need to be careful. The syndicate doesn't make mistakes when it comes to eliminating threats. Then they'd better not underestimate me, I said, my jaw set. Michael gave me Rachel's address reluctantly, warning me once again about the syndicate. I didn't care. If Liam was in danger, I needed to act fast. The drive felt endless. The rain started to fall, streaking the windshield and blurring the streetlights. My thoughts raced as I imagined what Liam might be like. Did he laugh like me? Did he love books like Rachel? Did he even know I existed? The house was modest, tucked away on a quiet street. The porch light flickered faintly, casting an eerie glow. My heart pounded as I approached the door. Before I could knock, it opened, and Rachel stood there. Her face was pale, her expression a mix of surprise and dread. John, what are you doing here? I need to see him, I said firmly. Rachel hesitated, then stepped aside. He's in his room. The living room was warm and cluttered, a child's toys scattered across the floor. My gaze caught a photo on the mantel, a candid shot of Liam, grinning as he held a soccer ball. The sight of him hit me harder than I expected. Rachel led me down the hall, stopping outside a door painted a vibrant blue. She knocked softly. Liam, there's someone here to meet you. The door creaked open, and there he was. Liam, my son. He looked up at me with curious green eyes, his head tilted slightly. Hi, he said shyly, clutching a toy car in his hand. I swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Hi, Liam. I'm John, your dad. His eyes widened, darting to Rachel for confirmation. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Liam stepped closer, studying me with the kind of seriousness only a child can muster. You're my dad? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, my voice thick. I didn't know about you until now. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. A small smile broke across his face, and he reached out to hug me. The moment his arms wrapped around me, something inside me shifted. He wasn't just a name or a photo anymore. He was my son, and I would do anything to protect him. But as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that the syndicate's eyes were already on us. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Rachel's living room, staring at the photo of Liam on the mantel. He was asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. Rachel sat across from me, her face etched with worry. They know, don't they? She asked softly. I nodded. I got a call after we met at the cafe. Someone told me to stay away from you. From this. Her hands trembled as she clutched her mug of tea. I knew they'd find out. They always do. Rachel, I said, leaning forward. We can't keep running. If we want to protect Liam, we need to face this head-on. Her eyes filled with tears. And what happens if we fail? They don't just kill you, John. They erase you. They destroy everything and everyone connected to you. Then we don't give them a choice, I said, my voice firm. We find a way to expose them. We fight back. Rachel shook her head. You don't understand how deep their reach goes. They have people in law enforcement, the courts. Then we go outside the system, I interrupted. There's always someone willing to take them down. Whistleblowers, journalists, someone. Before she could respond, the sound of glass shattering upstairs froze us both. Rachel shot to her feet, panic in her eyes. Liam! We raced up the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. The hallway was dark, but a faint beam of light spilled out from Liam's room. I burst through the door to find his window shattered, rain streaming in. The bed was empty. No! Rachel screamed, running to the broken window. I scanned the room, my mind racing. A toy car lay overturned near the window, and the curtains billowed in the wind. My blood ran cold as I spotted a black van speeding away down the street, its taillights vanishing into the night. They took him, Rachel sobbed. clutching the windowsill. I turned and grabbed her by the shoulders. Listen to me. We're going to get him back. But we need to act fast. Her tear-filled eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the spark of determination in her. What do we do? I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing. The syndicate had made their move, and now it was my turn. I didn't sleep that night. After Rachel called the authorities, I knew it was pointless. The syndicate had eyes everywhere. Police or not, they would have Liam long before anyone could act. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the shattered pieces of the world I thought I knew. Rachel paced beside me, muttering to herself in between desperate phone calls, trying to reach anyone who might help. But every connection she had seemed too far removed, too broken. We need to find out who's behind this, I said, finally breaking the silence. Michael's right, they don't leave loose ends. They won't let Liam go without making sure we're out of the picture. Rachel's face twisted with agony. And if we do find them, what then? We just walk in and take him. I met her gaze. We fight. We do whatever it takes. She sighed, defeated. I don't even know where to start. This whole thing, it's too big, John. We're just two people against an army. I stood up, a fire igniting within me. We're not just two people. We're Liam's parents. And that's all the strength we need. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized for years but never thought I'd need. Tom, I said when he picked up. I need your help. Tom was a private investigator I'd crossed paths with a few times during my time at Hartwell and Company. He was rough around the edges, but he had the kind of connections that could dig up the truth, no matter how buried it was. What happened? Tom's voice was steady, but I could tell he knew this wasn't just a routine case. Liam's been taken by a group called the Larkspur Syndicate. There was a long pause. Shit, Tom muttered. I've heard of them. Not good news, man. You need more than me on this. I know, but I need you to start looking for any links to them. Any connections to Hartwell and Company, the police, anyone who might have been involved in taking Liam. I'm on it, Tom said. You're not alone in this, John. I'll make some calls. I hung up, my hands still shaking. Rachel stared at me, her eyes wide. You really think Tom can help? He's our best shot, I said, walking toward the door. Now, we need to be ready. If they're watching, we need to stay one step ahead. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every car that passed outside felt like a threat. Every shadow in the corner of my eye made my heart race. But we couldn't hide forever. We had to move, and we had to move fast. I turned back to Rachel. Start packing. We're leaving. We'll meet Tom tomorrow. Her hands shook as she gathered a few belongings. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, I said. And we're not coming back until we have Liam. As we left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. But there was no time to worry about that now. We were in the fight of our lives. The drive was tense. Rachel and I barely spoke, our minds consumed by what had just happened. Tom had texted me updates, nothing concrete yet. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. When we arrived at a small, discreet motel, Rachel threw herself onto the bed, exhausted. I stood by the window watching for any signs of trouble, but the street was eerily quiet. I can't believe we're doing this, Rachel whispered. Is there even a way out of this mess? I didn't answer. I couldn't lie to her. All I knew was that if we didn't act now, it would be too late. Tom called. I've got something. Larkspur has a base of operations near the docks. I'll send you the address. But be careful. This isn't a small operation. It's all hands on deck. I hung up, looking at Rachel. It's time. We arrived at the docks in the dead of night. The place was deserted, save for a few rusted boats and the distant hum of machinery. I could feel my pulse quicken with each step we took. Tom had warned me, but I wasn't ready for what I saw. Men in dark suits and earpieces patrolled the area, their eyes scanning the shadows. They were everywhere. This is insane, Rachel muttered, clutching my arm. They'll kill us. We're not backing down, I said, my voice low. We moved silently, ducking behind crates and shipping containers, trying to stay out of sight. Every creak of metal, Every footstep sent our hearts into overdrive. Then, through the cracks in a container, I saw him. Liam. He was in a cage. The sight of Liam in that cage nearly broke me. But there was no time for hesitation. I turned to Rachel, my eyes burning with determination. Stay low. We move fast. We crept closer, my heart thundering in my chest. The men guarding Liam were distracted, but I knew it wouldn't last long. We had minutes, maybe seconds. I signaled to Rachel and she nodded. She was scared. I could see it, but she trusted me. We approached the cage, and as I reached through the bars, I whispered, "Liam, it's me, your dad." His eyes widened, and a small, hopeful smile broke across his face. "Dad." "Yes, buddy. We're getting you out of here. Stay quiet." I turned, my hand on the cage door, when suddenly a sharp voice rang out. "Don't move." It was him, the leader of the syndicate, standing at the end of the alley with a gun in hand. I didn't flinch. "Let him go." He smirked, his grip tightening on the gun. "You really think you can stop this?" In a flash, everything went wrong. Shots rang out. But I didn't wait. I lunged at him, taking him down before he could fire again. The gun slid across the floor as the guards rushed in. Chaos. Rachel screamed for Liam to run as I fought off the remaining guards. Every punch, every kick was a fight for my son's life. And then, finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The police had arrived. The syndicate had underestimated me, underestimated us. But it wasn't over. This battle was won, but the war had just begun. I looked at Liam, my son, standing safely beside Rachel. And for the first time in years, I finally felt hope. If this story made you think, feel something, or inspired you, leave a comment below. Have you ever had to fight for what you love? Let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to stay with us on this journey.